The biker's lesson. It was a cool autumn evening, and the streets of the city seemed quieter than usual. The hum of traffic was distant. The only sound breaking the calm was the roar of motorcycles that occasionally passed through. Among them was Artem, a seasoned biker who lived for the thrill of the ride. His black leather jacket hugged his body like a second skin, and his helmet, decorated with intricate designs, reflected the neon glow of the streetlights. The loud rumble of his bike was almost like a comforting rhythm to him, marking the pulse of the city as he sped through the empty streets. As Artem made his way down the main avenue, he could feel the freedom of the night in his bones. The wind whipped past him, tousling his hair beneath his helmet. He didn't have any particular destination in mind. For him, the journey itself was enough. The night always felt different on two wheels. The world was quieter, simpler, and the only thing that mattered was the road ahead. But then, as he approached an intersection, his eyes caught sight of something unusual. A man was walking slowly along the sidewalk, his head tilted slightly forward. He held a white cane in one hand, tapping it rhythmically on the ground, while with the other hand, he guided his dog beside him. The dog was a large German shepherd, its coat shining in the dim streetlight, wearing a specially marked harness. Artem slowed his bike, intrigued by the sight. It wasn't common to see a blind person out this late, especially with a service dog. Without much thought, Artem pulled up next to the man, his bike idling with a low, threatening growl. A mischievous grin spread across his face. He had a reputation for being a bit of a troublemaker, and tonight, he decided to have a little fun. "Hey there, pal," Artem called out to the man, who didn't seem to notice him at first. The dog, however, raised its ears at the sound of the engine. "Nice dog you've got there," he added, his voice almost too cheerful. The man turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Artem, sensing an opportunity for a joke, leaned slightly over and kicked the German shepherd gently in the side. It wasn't a hard kick, just enough to startle the dog. The shepherd reacted immediately, barking loudly and stepping back, clearly thrown off balance. The man's face tensed, and his hand instinctively gripped the cane tighter. "Hey!" he called out sharply, his voice low but full of warning. Artem, however, only chuckled to himself, thinking the whole thing was a harmless prank. The dog was fine. No harm done. But then the man's next words struck Artem like a punch in the gut. "That's my service dog," the man said, his voice no longer carrying the warmth it had moments before. "She's not just some pet, you know. She's trained to help me live, to keep me alive." Artem's heart skipped a beat. For the first time, he noticed something about the man's voice. It wasn't just the voice of a blind person. It was the voice of someone who had lived through challenges, someone who knew the importance of the bond with his dog. His grin faltered. The dog, meanwhile, stood at attention, a quiet growl emanating from its throat as it positioned itself between the man and Artem. It was protective, a trained guardian of its handler. I didn't know," Artem muttered, suddenly feeling the weight of his mistake. He looked at the dog, which now had its eyes locked on him, its posture firm. The playful edge of the moment had vanished. The man took a step forward, his cane tapping the ground with authority. "You think this is funny? You think you can just mess with anyone because you're on your bike? Feeling all tough?" Artem opened his mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. He'd grown up around animals, and he knew the importance of training, of trust, between a pet and its owner. But he had never truly understood what it meant to depend on a service dog. "I wasn't thinking," Artem said finally, his voice quieter. "It was stupid. I see that now. I'm really sorry." The man stood still for a moment, the tension in his shoulders visible even in the low light. He stared at Artem, weighing his words carefully. The dog, sensing the man's emotional shift, calmed down slightly but still watched Artem closely, not fully trusting him. "You know," the man said, his voice softer now, "I've had a lot of people pull stupid pranks like that. They think it's funny. They don't understand what it's like to rely on her to get through the day. When you have a disability, when you can't see the world around you, this dog is your eyes, your guide, your protector. Without her, I'd be lost." Artem felt a pang of guilt. The carefree attitude he'd always had started to feel foreign to him. "I didn't realize. I didn't think about what she meant. I thought it was just a joke. The man's tone softened further, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that Artem couldn't ignore. It's not about jokes. It's about respect. My dog has saved my life more times than I can count. She's not just a pet. She's part of me. So, when you kick her for fun, you're disrespecting that bond. And that's not something I can just laugh off. Artem nodded, deeply ashamed. He had never truly considered the sacrifices and challenges that people with disabilities face. The notion of a service dog, an animal that was far more than just a companion, was something he hadn't fully grasped until now. I'm sorry, Artem repeated, his voice quieter this time, but more sincere. I won't do it again. I promise. The man nodded, the lines in his face relaxing as he let out a small sigh. I appreciate that. And I know you didn't mean any harm, but think before you act next time. There are a lot of people in this world who can't see, but there are even more who can't see past their own ignorance. A silence hung between them for a moment. Artem, still perched on his bike, felt a weight in his chest. It wasn't just the guilt. It was the realization that he had been oblivious to something important in the world, something he'd never even thought about before. I'll keep that in mind, Artem said finally, his voice steady. I really will. The man nodded, his dog now sitting calmly beside him. Good. Just be better, that's all I ask. Artem gave him a small, respectful nod. He revved his bike once, letting the engine's deep growl fill the silence. As he pulled away, he glanced back at the man and the dog. The moment lingered in his mind long after he had passed them. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a lesson, one that Artem would never forget. And from that night onward, whenever he saw someone with a service dog, he would slow down, even stop if necessary, and give them the respect they deserved. Because Artem had learned that true strength was not in the power of the engine beneath him, but in the quiet bonds of trust and respect that tied people together, no matter the circumstances. Artem rode his bike for several blocks, but the images of the blind man and his service dog lingered in his mind. The evening air, which had once felt exhilarating and freeing, now seemed heavier. His usual sense of carefree freedom had been replaced by an unexpected weight in his chest. He had spent so many years riding through life without thinking deeply about the world around him, always just gliding from one moment to the next. But tonight, the world had shifted in a way he couldn't ignore. He sped down a quieter street, weaving through the occasional cars parked along the curb. His mind raced with guilt and reflection. He had never fully understood what it meant to rely on someone, or something else, especially not in the way the blind man relied on his dog. To Artem, a dog had always been a pet, a companion for walks or a guard dog for the home. He had never considered that a dog could be a lifeline, an essential part of someone's very existence. His prideful, impulsive behavior had thrown that balance out of whack, and it unsettled him deeply. The rumbling engine beneath him, which had once felt like an extension of his own being, now seemed strangely out of place. As he cruised past familiar storefronts, something about his surroundings felt different. The night felt colder, and the silence was deeper, more unsettling. Artem couldn't help but replay the man's words in his mind, each one hitting him harder than the last. She's trained to help me live, to keep me alive. Those words echoed in his thoughts. The sheer importance of that relationship, the bond between the blind man and his dog, had struck him like a cold wave. For the first time, Artem understood that not everyone had the luxury of independence. Not everyone could simply pick up and go wherever they pleased. Some people, like that man, had to rely on others, on their service animals, just to navigate a world that seemed designed for those who could see, move freely, and make quick decisions. Artem turned onto another street and slowed down, his fingers tightening around the handlebars. He passed a familiar park where he used to hang out with his biker friends, but tonight, the place didn't hold the same comfort it usually did. He had lost the carefree joy of his usual routine. The thought of the man and his dog kept drawing him back, urging him to reconsider the kind of person he wanted to be. Was he the kind of person who thought nothing of others' struggles? Or could he change? Could he become someone who understood, someone who showed respect where it was due? He stopped the bike at a red light, staring at the crosswalk ahead. For a long moment, he sat there, trying to process the realization. The light turned green, but Artem didn't move. He stayed still, as if waiting for the answer to come to him in the hum of the engine. But the answer didn't come right away. All he could do was reflect. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out, seeing a message from one of his friends. "You still up for a ride tonight?" Artem stared at the message for a moment before typing a quick reply. "I think I need to head home for the night. Just not feeling it right now." He slid the phone back into his jacket pocket and glanced around. The streets seemed empty now, devoid of the usual bustle of nightlife. The night felt strangely still. The wind blew harder, rustling the leaves in the trees and sending a chill through his jacket. He started the bike again, but instead of speeding off into the night, he took a slow turn, heading back in the direction he had come from. The guilt he felt was heavier than any speed or adrenaline rush could provide. There was something about this feeling, a sense that he couldn't outrun, no matter how fast he tried to go. For the first time, he felt the weight of the world beyond his own, something larger than his own impulses and recklessness. He thought about how the blind man had reacted. It wasn't just about the dog. It was about respect, dignity, and understanding. The man had made a choice not to engage in anger, but instead to teach, to explain. As Artem cruised back toward the street where he had seen the man, he thought about how people often reacted when they felt disrespected. He had been ready to laugh it off, to continue his night as if nothing had happened. But the man hadn't allowed that. He had made Artem pause, made him realize that his actions had consequences far beyond his own amusement. When Artem finally arrived at the corner where the blind man and his dog had been, he didn't see them. The streets were quiet, and the only sound was the low hum of his bike's engine as he idled in place. He waited for a moment, almost hoping that he might spot them again, that somehow he could make it right. He felt a burning desire to apologize more thoroughly, to tell the man how deeply his words had impacted him, to show that he had learned something he would never forget. But the streets remained empty, and as the light turned red again, Artem realized that the moment had passed. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the lesson wasn't about getting the chance to make up for it immediately. Maybe it was about understanding that some lessons weren't meant to be fixed right away. The real lesson was internal. It was the change in perspective, the shift in how he viewed the world and the people around him. He revved the engine one last time, not as a sign of rebellion, but as a signal that he had changed. He wasn't the same person who had kicked that dog in the name of a joke. He was someone different now, someone who understood that there was a much deeper level of respect that had to be shown, not just to the man and his dog, but to everyone he would encounter in the future. Artem turned his bike around once more and started heading home, the quiet hum of the engine under him now feeling more like a quiet reflection than a thrill. He wasn't rushing anymore. The world didn't need to be conquered on two wheels. Not tonight. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he made a silent promise to himself that from now on, he would always think before he acted. He would take the time to understand, to show respect, and to be better. As he pulled into his apartment building parking lot, Artem parked the bike with a sense of finality. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about the next ride or the next thrill. He was thinking about how he could be a better person in the world that had just been illuminated for him in an entirely new light. He took off his helmet, stepping off the bike with a new sense of purpose. The streetlights glowed softly, and though the night was still, Artem felt different. His world had shifted, not because of the speed of his bike, but because of the moment of clarity he had found within himself. And though he might never see that man and his dog again, Artem knew that the lesson they taught him would stay with him for a lifetime.